So with no further comment, I'd like to invite board member Frank Joyce up, who will be introducing our keynote speaker.
Whether you know it or not, it's fair to say that everyone in this room has been touched by the work of Saru. If you've ever eaten at Color's restaurant downtown, that was a project of the Restaurant Opportunities Center. Saru helped found ROC in New York to support displaced workers from the World Trade Center after 9/11. If you participated in the many demonstrations and other activities to win decent wages at the Andiamo restaurant chain here in the Detroit area, that too was a Restaurant Opportunities Center project. Especially for those of us who've been involved in the organized labor movement, ROC has been a shining light in creating new ways to empower workers, especially low-wage workers. If you have become more aware in recent times of the struggles faced especially by women and minorities in the restaurant business, Saru has had a lot to do with that too, with her many books, articles, and media appearances. If you have signed a petition for the One Fair Wage ballot campaign here in Michigan, same story. And if you haven't signed, please fix that right away. You can do it right down the hall. If you watched the Golden Globe Awards, you might have seen Saru there. She was the guest of Amy Poehler. If you were reading the New York Times just this past Thursday, you would have seen her as a featured speaker at an upcoming event to, quote, meet the people who change the world. Brothers and sisters, we have all heard the expression, you can't always get what you want. This evening, I am proud to welcome a leader that our movement both wants and needs, Saru Jayaraman.
I am so grateful and honored to be here. I love coming to Detroit. It's my second home, and it's so wonderful to be with family that believes in all the things I believe in and hold dear, especially when I travel the country and am in the middle of fighting with the National Restaurant Association or Trump or the likes and his cronies. It's so wonderful to come home to family that really believes in the things that I believe in. Thank you. So I want to thank all the folks at MCHR for having me. I want to thank all of our allies in the room. I want to thank all of you. I want to recognize our ROC people here today, Dr. Alicia Ferris, Lucretia, who's a member, Godwin, who's a member of RAISE, Jonathan, who's an organizer, and all of our allies. I'll be calling you out in a little bit. But just to tell you a little bit of background about me and this fight, and for those of you that don't know as much, as you heard, my name is Saru. I co-founded ROC right after 9/11 together with the workers from Windows on the World, which was the restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center Tower 1. And on 9/11, there were 73 workers who died that morning at the top of the World Trade Center. They either jumped to their deaths from the 107th floor or they were literally evaporated inside the restaurant because the plane hit below them and the heat rose so quickly that they were evaporated within minutes. And if you have any recollections of 9/11, you may remember images of people jumping with tablecloths and napkins. Those were the workers, mostly immigrants and people of color, who were getting ready for the day's meals that day on 9/11. So 73 workers died and about 250 workers lost their jobs at that one restaurant, and 13,000 restaurant workers lost their jobs in the months and weeks that followed in New York City because nobody was eating out. And I was a young lawyer and an organizer, and at a very young age was asked, because they really couldn't find anybody else, I was default, to come start a little relief center that we created in the aftermath of the tragedy, me together with the displaced workers from Windows on the World, and we called it ROC, the Restaurant Opportunity Center. And what started as a little relief center that we called Rock has grown. Now, 16 years later, we now have 30,000 worker members. We have 500 restaurant owner members, fabulous restaurant owner partners who stand with us like Godwin and Zingerman's and Russell Street Deli and so many others who believe in our mission of raising wages and working conditions in this industry, and 23,000 consumer members. So we've grown geographically. We're in 10 states. Michigan was one of the first places we came after 9/11 as we grew nationally. We're in 10 states now. We have online members across the country. We've grown numerically, but to me, one of the most interesting ways in which we've grown is that we've grown to open our arms, not just to more and more workers, but to unlikely allies like employers and consumers, to say, you know, we all do better when workers do better. We all do better when the people most affected do better. And over the last 16 years, we've done a lot of things. We've opened 4 restaurants called Colors. We've written lots of books and put out lots of research. We've won lots of policy campaigns. We've won back at least $15 million in stolen tips and wages. We've done a lot of different things. But the most important thing to note is whatever we're doing is so not enough. It's a drop in the bucket. Because the restaurant industry right now is the second largest and absolute fastest growing sector of the US economy. It's almost 13 million workers. 1 in 11 Americans and 1 in 11 Michiganders works in this one industry. It is the fastest growing industry in Michigan. It's the epitome, Michigan is the epitome really. We're almost at 500,000 workers here in the state of Michigan. You know, of that 13 million nationally, imagine that 126 is in this one state right here. It's the epitome of what's really happening, which is that as manufacturing jobs disappear, the service sector is taking over, and the restaurant industry is the leader of the service sector. And that might be a wonderful thing because this is a wonderful, skilled, professional profession, right? It's a wonderful thing to do to serve somebody. Hospitality should be valued as it is in other countries. But unfortunately, despite the fact that we are the largest and fastest growing industry, we are also the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States. So every year the Department of Labor, as long as we had a functioning Department of Labor, put out a list of the 10 lowest paying jobs, and every year 7 of the 10 lowest paying jobs are in one industry, the restaurant industry. And so first, before we think about anything else, we need to pause as a nation, as a room, as a country, as an industry, and say, what does that mean when you've got the nation's largest and fastest growing industry proliferating the absolute lowest paying, bottom of the barrel jobs? What does that mean? It means that right now, 1 in 3, a little over 1 in 3 working Americans works full time and lives in poverty. And it's expected, actually it's getting faster every time I give this speech and look at the data. By 2020, it is expected that 1 in 2 working Americans will work full-time or more than full-time and live in poverty. And that growth from 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 is due almost entirely to the growth in 2 sectors, retail and restaurants. The 2 fastest growing and lowest paying sectors of our economy. And so what does it mean for the future of our nation when half of America cannot afford to consume? What does it mean for our GDP? What does it mean for the restaurant industry when half of the nation can't afford to eat, let alone eat out? It means we won't have a restaurant industry. We won't have a GDP. There will be no future to this country when half of America can't afford to eat. And the fact that we've got the largest and fastest growing industry proliferating the absolute lowest paying jobs is not inherent to this industry. It's not absolute or necessary or, pun intended, organic to the nature of running a restaurant. No, it is due entirely to the money, power, and influence of a trade lobby that's been after me for 16 years called the National Restaurant Association. We call them the other NRA. You've heard a lot about the Rifle Association in the last couple of months. You need to know about the other NRA. They are just as powerful and just as deadly. As many people die from the policies of the Restaurant Association, whether it's from diabetes or poverty, as they do from the Rifle Association. It has been named the 10th most powerful lobbying group in Congress and the number one most powerful lobbying group against any kind of increase in employment standards for all sectors of the economy, not just the restaurant industry. So I was doing research for my last book, Forked, and I had always thought the other NRA, which represents the chains, the IHOPs, the Applebee's, the Olive Gardens, I had thought they had been around maybe 30 years, maybe 50 years tops. Oh no, in doing research for my last book, turns out they've been around 150 years since the emancipation of the slaves. Because it turns out that tipping as a practice did not originate in the United States. It originated in feudal Europe. If you've ever seen Downton Abbey, or you've ever read old English literature, William Thackeray or Jeeves and Wooster, any of these old books, you will see references to tipping. It was noblesse oblige, something that an aristocrat or a noble gave to a serf or a vassal or a domestic worker, always on top of a wage. And when that idea of a tip came to the United States, it was around the time of emancipation in the 1860s, and America resoundingly rejected the idea of tipping. There was actually a massive populist movement in America to reject the idea of tipping. 6 states in the US passed bans, prohibitions on tipping. They said it was undemocratic and un-American. They said this is a vestige of the feudal system. And would you believe de Tocqueville came from France, wrote about American democracy, and held up the lack of tipping as a hallmark of American democracy. And that movement, that populist movement that was so successful and vibrant, spread to Europe. The labor movement picked it up in Europe, rejected tipping as a vestige of the feudal system, had a call for professionalism, and that is why when you go to Europe, you do not tip. But here in the States, we went in the exact opposite direction because of 2 industries, the restaurant industry and the Pullman train company, both of which demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves. Remember, this is right after abolition. Not pay them anything at all. After all, they were black and hadn't been paid anything for centuries. Give them a $0 wage and let them live on tips. Now, if you know anything about labor history or racial justice history, you know that the Pullman car porters formed the first black union in the United States under the leadership of A. Philip Randolph, this Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And that mostly male workforce got an actual wage rather than having to rely on tips. But the black female workforce working in restaurants as tipped workers got, guess what? 0. Literally, legally, statistically. Because in 1938, when the first minimum wage law passed under the New Deal as FDR's gift to America, everybody got the right to a minimum wage except tipped workers, who got the right to a $0 wage as long as tips brought them to the full minimum wage. That was a mostly black female workforce at that time. We went from $0 in 1938 to the whopping $2.13 an hour, the current federal minimum wage for tipped workers in 2018. And an even more wonderfully hooray-inspiring $3.52 here in the great state of Michigan. A $2, $3, or $4 increase in most states in the United States over a 150-year period for a mostly female population. Only here's the problem. It isn't just some tiny sliver of America that's earning $2, $3, and $4 an hour. This is the largest and fastest growing industry in America, paying $2, $3, and $4 an hour in how many states? 43 states in the United States. All because of the power and influence of this trade lobby, which has gotten away with convincing state legislators, Congress, and even the American people, we shouldn't have to pay our own workers. You, the customers, should pay our workers' wages for us. And if you think about it, It is the most extraordinary boondoggle. It's essentially getting one group of working people to pay another group of working people's wages for them. Thankfully, there are 7 states that got rid of this legacy of slavery many decades ago. California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Montana, Alaska, and not too far away, Minnesota. All of which require the restaurant industry to pay the full wage with tips on top. And if you listen to the other NRA, you'd think there were no restaurants in those 7 states. The industry must have fallen through a sinkhole in the ground. All jobs must be lost, and when you go to Minnesota, you must pay $50 for your meal. When in fact, these 7 states have higher restaurant sales per capita, higher job growth in the industry, higher job growth among tipped workers, higher rates of tipping. We tip better in these 7 states. And the same menu prices. So how is that possible? It's possible because people stood up in those states and said, absolutely not. We will not let you, trade lobby, get away with this incredible boondoggle. Because here's what we are left with in Michigan and the 43 states where the restaurant industry has basically held women under its thumb. We are left with an industry that argues it's okay. These are white guys working in fancy fine dining restaurants in Detroit and Troy. They're making $100,000 a year. They love that number. $50 an hour. I'm often on television with them. They use these literal numbers. $100,000 a year. $50. It was so funny. Recently, a couple years ago, I was contacted by the U.S. Senate Budget Office, and they said, "Oh, Saru, it's so strange. The National Restaurant Association and Darden, which is Olive Garden's parent company, they were just in here a few days ago, and they said, our workers make at least $20 an hour in tips all across the country." And the Senate Budget Office says, that's so funny because Rock has shown us very opposite data, showing these are the poorest workers in America, even when you take tips into account. Can you give us some proof that restaurant workers across America make $20 minimum with tips? So the next day, he says, we got a letter from the National Restaurant Association on National Restaurant Association letterhead that says, restaurant workers make $20 an hour with tips. And that is the kind of proof they've gotten away with providing for 150 years, saying it's okay, it's all right. We don't need to pay these workers. Other people are paying their wages. They're making a ton of money when in fact, 70% of tipped workers in America and 80% here in Michigan are, guess who? They are women. They are disproportionately women of color. They are women who struggle with 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce and use food stamps at double the rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce. And worst of all, for anybody in this room who has a conscience at all, they have the highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry in the United States. Because when you're a woman in Michigan earning $3.52 an hour, whether you're a young woman or an older woman, you must tolerate whatever the customer does to you, however they touch you or treat you or talk to you, because the customer is always right. The customer pays your bills, not your employer. The customer is who feeds your family, not your employer. And over the last couple of months with Me Too and Time's Up, we have been getting thousands of women telling us the most horrific stories. It has been a painful couple of months. Because what we've come to learn is that when you earn tips, your wage is $0 today, $200 tomorrow, or $50 now, $3 tomorrow. It goes up and down, and that variability gives every man in the restaurant power over you. Not just the customer, the kitchen staff. I had a woman call in, I was on NPR recently. A woman calls in, she says, I didn't even think about it as sexual harassment until you talked right now, but I have to tell you, every day I'm working, the kitchen staff makes me flash, show my breasts, in order to get the meal I need to get the tip from the customer. The manager makes me kiss him to get the right shift, or the right day, or the right table, because all the men know my wages, my income to feed my children, 40% of tipped workers are single moms, could be nothing or it could be a lot, based on what they do for me and what I do for them. And besides the fact that there are millions of women who put up with this every day of their lives, There are millions more young women for whom this is the first job in high school, college, or graduate school. This is how young women and men in America are introduced to the world of work. 1 in 2 American adults works in this industry at some point in their lifetime. How many of you have worked in the restaurant industry? Will you look around the room? This is how we learn what is acceptable, tolerable, legal, ethical in the workplace. So that I've been spending a lot of time since the Golden Globes with actresses, so many of them, so many senators I work with in Congress, state senators, lawyers, doctors, so many women tell me, I've been harassed more recently in my career, but I didn't do anything about it because it was never as bad as it was when I was a young woman working in restaurants. Which means our industry doesn't just have the highest rate of harassment, which it doesn't mean that it's the worst. It also means that we set the standard for the rest of the economy, both in terms of wages and the treatment of women, all because of the power of this trade association. So in 2013, we launched a campaign called One Fair Wage. We said if California and Minnesota, and for God's sakes, if Alaska could do it, then certainly Michigan and New York, for goodness sake, and Massachusetts, which is $3 an hour, and DC, which is $3.33. Every state can do it. Congress can do it. We all can do it. We can stand up to the other NRA. We launched this campaign in 2013. We've been moving this states, so many states. And of course, it hasn't been without incredible pushback from the Restaurant Association. They have done everything to try to stop us. They created attack websites and put my little baby's pictures up on the attack websites. They spent $6 million following me around the country. They did 3 congressional investigations into us. 2 were Darrell Issa, thank goodness he's retiring. They have done lawsuits. They went into our foundation funders' websites and tried to hack the websites to stop grant funding to us. They have pulled full-page ads in Wall Street Journal and USA Today. They have sued us for at least $20 million. And I am so proud of all of it. I am so proud that that ridiculous bully thinks that we little people, we mostly brown and black people, are a threat to them. We're little. And we've been such a threat to them. And when it comes to the sexual harassment, they have nothing to say. And we keep winning. When they got their BFF, Donald Trump, I won't even say BFF, their member. Don't forget, Donald Trump is a restaurant owner. When they got their member, Donald Trump, to put forward a labor secretary for a candidate named Andy Puzder. I don't know if you remember who he was. If you go online and you Google Carl's Jr. ads, this was the CEO of Carl's Jr. Please do that at some point in your life. You will see pornography because this man created an ad campaign with literally naked women holding burgers in front of their breasts and in their crotches. And we surveyed 1,000 Carl's Jr. workers across the country. Most of them were girls under the age of 20 who told us when the ads came out, men would walk into the restaurants and say, you don't look like the girls in the ads, but I'll take you anyway. Follow them out in the parking lots, assault them, following them into their cars and assault them. We mobilized these 1,000 workers, took them to DC, did a hearing with Senator Warren, and we got that man out. I could tell you so many victories with the NRA, but another one just happened. They've been going around the country as we've been trying to raise wages because they have nothing to say on the sexual harassment. They've stopped debating me publicly because they have nothing to say. So what they're doing instead is a scare tactic, going around and trying to tell workers, if we raise your wages, nobody will tip you anymore. Nobody's going to tip you. Meanwhile, while they're telling you your tips are going to go away if we give you an actual wage, which is, by the way, absolute baloney because people tip better in the 7 states with higher wages, while they've been scaring people in that way, they went secretly, got together with their member and BFF, Donald Trump, and actually tried to make it true with a new rule that says tips are the property of owners rather than workers. We mobilized 350,000 workers and consumers to actually submit comments. We did actions across the country, including here in Detroit. Dr. Alicia Ferris can tell you more about that. In DC, we dropped a huge banner off the side of the Department of Labor building that said, "Trump, do not steal our tips." And last week, Secretary Acosta capitulated and said, yes, it's true, tips are not the property of employers. I could say more, but I can't right now, so pay attention in the next few weeks. You're going to see an even bigger announcement victory on this. But these are the kinds of examples where, with little people, and lots of them, we can stand up to the most powerful lobby in the country on workers' rights issues. So if we can do that everywhere, can't we do it here? We can do it here, and we have a little bit of wind under our wings now, because after 16 years of fighting the National Restaurant Association, we got some vindication. When Harvey Weinstein, right, was accused and had to step down, and then so many restaurant owners also had to step down, we finally started getting a ton of press and attention for all the work we had done for years showing the connection between the $2 and $3 wages women earn in this country and sexual harassment. And right before Christmas, with all this attention, Governor Cuomo, Governor of New York, announced that he would make New York the 8th state in the union to eliminate the lower wage for tipped workers. We thought that was great, but it's Governor Cuomo, and we had no idea whether it would actually happen. So early this year, Amy Poehler invited me to the Golden Globes. 2 weeks later, I was on Bill Maher. On Bill Maher, I named the women legislators who led the fight in New York for one fair wage. And the day later, Governor Cuomo announced a schedule of hearings to make New York the 8th state in the union to eliminate the lower wage for tipped workers. But, I mean, yes, we're clapping, but sometimes I stay up late at night and I say, I cannot believe I'm spending my life just fighting for women in America to get an actual wage. That's ridiculous. New York should have done this 100 years ago, like California. Michigan is where it's at. If you do this in Michigan this year, there will be dozens of states, and I know because I'm meeting with legislators in states around the Midwest and around the country who are telling me if Michigan does it this year, you will be the leader. It will happen nationwide. Wouldn't it be amazing for Michigan, Detroit, and Michigan to be the first before Massachusetts, right? Before Pennsylvania, before all the other supposedly blue states, that you will be first. You will lead. You will be the first to get rid of this legacy of slavery and this scourge of sexual harassment. You will do this because we are going to get this thing on the ballot and we are going to win. And so we need your help. We need your help. We need your help. We're already surpassed 200,000 signatures. We've got only 150,000 or so to go. We need your help. We have a few months left. We need you to get these petitions out. We know from talking to pollsters, this is the most popular issue out there. When we put this on the ballot in Maine, it was the most popular ballot measure in the history of the state of Maine. More people voted for it than either presidential candidate. We need your help to make this happen here in Michigan and to overcome the millions and millions of dollars you know the Restaurant Association is going to pour into this state to scare people into thinking it can't be done, into thinking that they will be worse off, into thinking somehow these jobs will go away when they are not going anywhere. We can do it together. I call it our David versus Goliath fight. We are women standing up to the NRA. And we are saying, guess what? We are not on the menu. We say we're not on the menu because do you know when we released this research showing that the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers is the source of the worst sexual harassment of any industry, the industry was dumb enough at the same time to announce a newly recognized industry segment called the breastaurant. It's a real thing. And it's not just Hooters and Tilted Kilt and the fastest growing chain in America, Twin Peaks. It's also IHOP and Denny's and Coney Island diners. All are called restaurants now because there's so much encouragement by managers to show your breasts, dress more sexy, show more cleavage, wear tighter clothing so you can make more money in tips. And our research shows the 7 states that have one fair wage have half the rate of harassment and 1/3 the rate of managers telling women dress more sexy, show more cleavage, wear tighter clothing. Why? Because in Minnesota, a woman gets a full wage from her boss. She doesn't have to tolerate anything and everything from the customers in order to feed her families. She doesn't have to show her breasts to the kitchen staff because she knows she gets a full wage just like they do. She has power, and we all know that the fundamental root of sexual harassment is what? It is power, the power a woman has. Whether she's a young woman in high school or college working in this as her first job, or she's a woman who's been doing this job, which should be valued as a profession for her whole career. Everybody in this industry should be treated with the respect and dignity that it is awarded in Europe, where it is a profession. You go to school for many years to be a hospitality professional in Europe. We have the possibility to make that true here. Working with fabulous high road restaurant owners like Godwin and Zingerman's and Russell Street Deli, we can make it a reality. So what do we need? We need your help to get those signatures, right? We need your help to get more of your favorite restaurant owners to sign on. We need you to tell everybody in Michigan we need this because we have a choice, right? We have a same choice. We're faced with the same choice that America was faced with 150 years ago. 150 years ago, there were 2 industries who said the same thing the restaurant industry is saying right now, right? 2 industries who said, we will never survive if you make us pay our own workers' wages. And we as a country, we said no. We said, no, that is inhumane. It is unacceptable. It is illegal, it's immoral, and it's an unsustainable business practice. No. We said no to slavery. So why 150 years later are we letting a trade lobby tell us they cannot pay their own workers' wages? Literally, that is a slave wage, $3.52. I'm not saying that rhetorically, literally and historically, it is a slave wage. So we have a choice. We can ask ourselves, who gets to determine how a young woman is treated in America, goes on for the rest of her life believing she can be treated? Is it a trade lobby? Who tells us whether people in America will be paid $3 as a legacy of slavery? Who tells us whether we as the state of Michigan could lead this end to this legacy of slavery and sexual harassment? Is it a trade lobby, the Michigan Restaurant Association, the other NRA, or is it we, the people? I think it's we, the people. Thank you.
Power to the people! All right. So all I know is if I was the Restaurant Association, I'd be scared.